When centaurs walked the earth and took the women of their choosing. When men lived in the ribald revelry of paganism. When myth and reality were almost one. Then did Goliath descend into the depths of the lost worlds to meet his greatest challenge. No man could match the king's cleverness or cruelties. No man could match Goliath's might or Goliath's warmth. But when his younger brother falls madly in love, the boy becomes easy prey for the monstrous king, whose greatest pleasure is inventing new ways to murder the unprotected and the innocent, and bait a trap to bring Goliath to him. Deep in the earth's dungeons, Goliath meets the fire-breathing, man-eating, three-headed dog of darkness. Then, with the might of 1,000 men, Goliath brings down the wrath of the heavens on his enemies.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hello and welcome to the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And today we are talking about Goliath and the Dragon from 1960. Join us as we go back to the days when men were men, skirts were short, and men wore those skirts.
Goliath and the Dragon was directed by Vittorio Cottafavi, from a screenplay by Marcello Baldi, Duccio Tessari, Mario Ferrari, Nicolo Ferrari, Fabio Carpi, Ennio Concini, and Franco Rossetti, from a story by Marcello Baldi and Nicolo Ferrari.
Goliath and the Dragon stars Mark Forrest as Emilius, better known as the Goliath, Roderick Crawford as King Eurytus, Sandro Moretti as Ilus, Gabby Andre as Ismene, Philip Percent as Antonios, Leonoro Ruffo as Dejanira, Giancarlo Sabraggia as Tindar, Wandisa Guida as Elsinore,
Federica Ranchi as Thea, Carlo Kello as La Sibilla, the Wind Goddess, Ugo Sasso as Timocles, Claudio Andari as the Centaur, Grazia Calati as Iride, Thea's slave, and Salvatore Furnari as the little peasant.
The movie opens with a prologue. Our narrator tells us that Emilius the Mighty, the Goliath of Thebes, lived in the days when men worshipped strange pagan gods, believing in their magical powers with unshakable faith. Legend has it that Goliath served the god of vengeance and the goddess of the four winds. In return for his devotion, he was said to be favored with immortality. He would never know death at the hands of any mortal. Goliath was held in awe by his friends and enemies alike. Only one man, Eurytus, the tyrant of Italia, did not believe in Goliath's power to escape death. Determined to slay him and seize Goliath's powerful kingdom of Thebes, Eurytus had stolen the precious blood diamond belonging to the god of vengeance and hid it in the Cave of Horrors. After many months of searching, Goliath found the fearsome cave and, unafraid, entered in to fulfill his vow to return the blood diamond to his god. That's the previously on Goliath.
And during this narration, we see Goliath working to do just that. He's climbing these crevices down into a cave.
I put spelunking.
And the rocks beneath him are smoking.
Well, it is a cave of horrors, don't forget.
He finally makes it to the ground and continues on. He stops when he hears a sound, and ahead of him, he sees a three-headed dog.
It's Cerberus, who you may have read about in your Greek mythology class. The dog has 3 heads. It's chained to the entrance to the cave, and it also breathes fire, which is very inconvenient for our hero.
Yeah, it starts spitting fire at him, and so Goliath stabs a few of the throats.
I think he got all 3.
He got at least 2 of them, and it was enough to make the dog die. So the dog is dead, and then the wall behind it just crumbles, and then Goliath can continue his quest.
He can, but we are switching to another scene. We hear Eurytus, the king of Italia and current ruler of Ocalia, confidently proclaim that Goliath will never return from his journey. He'll never defeat the dragon that Eurytus placed there. We don't know how he knows this, but word gets around, I guess.
At any rate, he is certain that this will be the end of Goliath and thus the end of Thebes.
He's talking to assembled leaders of the various city-states who are gathered in his hall. Eurytus says, and Thebes without Goliath is nothing. It will fall without a fight.
One member of his court says that Goliath cannot die until the gods will it, and that he'll believe it when he sees the body. But Eurytus doesn't want to entertain negative or opposite opinions.
Yes, he asks for a second opinion, and the other leader says, if Goliath is dead, and Eurytus barks, if. I didn't send for you to listen to your doubts and fears. He wants to know if the leaders will fight by his side, and he basically polls them to find out who's in and who's out.
Then Timocles enters. He is a ruler of another city nearby, I suppose.
I think it's Megara, like in the Hercules movie.
And Timocles says that, of course, all of the men are with him. But then he reminds Eurytus that the walls of Thebes are strong, even without Goliath to help protect them.
And the men of his city cower at the thought of fighting Goliath. Eurytus says they fear the vengeance of a dead man. And then we cut to the very much not dead Goliath, still prowling through that cave.
He comes across a very white skeleton chained to the wall of the cave. As Goliath watches, a couple of soldiers stroll through. There's an unusual sound, but the guards don't seem concerned by this. And Goliath sees that the source of the sound is a dragon. And he's like, great, now I have to kill a dragon. And he's kind of planning the best way to do this when a woman's voice calls through the cave.
I just want to point out here that the dragon doesn't look that impressive. It looks like a small lizard, much as we see all the time in our house here in Arizona. The transmission from the wind goddess tells him that his is a greater mission. He has to return the blood gem. He looks at the dragon and says, I'll be back.
He literally says that.
I added the accent, though.
So now we're back at Ocalia, and we see Ilus bribing a guard. We don't know this yet, but Ilus is the brother of Goliath.
The guard warns Ilus that he has only 1 hour before the changing of the guard, and he better be back if he values his life.
Another character, this is Tindar. He sees this oral transaction, and Tindar is an advisor to King Eurytus.
He tells Eurytus that he's arrived. Then the other leaders promise Eurytus that he will have their answer tomorrow, and Eurytus reluctantly accepts this. And he rings the gong for the feast.
Yeah, he says, very well, let's eat. My cook grows impatient.
Ilus, the briber who had to pay his way into the compound, is with his secret love, Thea. Goliath forbids their love. That's Ilus's brother. Like we said, Thea's not happy with this. They're not criminals. They talk about running away together. Ilus wants to go right now, but Thea says there's too many guards about. Ilus gives her his ring. When she's ready, he wants her to send his ring to him, and he will come.
Now, the reason that they've been forbidden to see each other, this has been passed down by Goliath himself. Apparently, in the past, Thea's father had killed Ilus and Goliath's parents. And Goliath still holds that grudge, but Ilus is cool with it because he's got this thing for Thea.
Thea is the daughter of the former ruler of Ocalia. Eurytus is now currently in charge of Ocalia because he killed Thea's parents. Now we're back with Goliath. He throws a boulder at some sort of blood geyser, exposing a shiny gem.
But before he can get that gem, a large bat attacks him.
This bat is hilarious.
It roars and they battle, and the bat eventually falls dead.
It didn't take that long, to be honest.
None of the battles in this movie take very long.
No, Goliath is just that strong. Also, the monsters are pretty weak. They're just men in mangy costumes.
So Goliath picks up the blood gem.
Back at Eurytus' palace, Tindar thanks Ismene, who's his sister. She helped tell him that a signal had been given that Ilus is coming into the castle. Tindar plans to capture him, and he couldn't have done it without her. This was also part of Eurytus' plan. He wants the brother of Goliath to use as a wedge against him.
Ismene says it's a shame she has to betray Thea because she's been such a good friend to her.
But she loves Eurytus too much, and it's definitely bros over hoes here.
So Tindar leaves, and Ismene goes around the back to warn Thea that they're coming.
If Ilus has got to go, Ilus rushes off. Ismene tells Thea that she still has her. If Eurydice knew that Ismene had been helping Thea with her secret assignations, Ismene would be killed.
So this is kind of complicated, but the basic explanation is that Ilus is from Thebes, so he's basically in enemy territory right now, stealing off to visit Thea. He's willing to risk that because he's got this thing for her. He's in love with her.
This is a Romeo and Juliet type situation, basically. Theirs is a secret love that cannot be expressed in public because of the two warring families.
So Thea is a friend of Ismene, who is the sister of Tindar, and Thea let it slip that Ilus was coming around tonight. And since Ismene is a slave to King Eurydice and she's loyal to him, she told him what was going on. So this is just an elaborate plan to capture Ilus of Thebes.
Exactly. And capture him they do. A couple of guards throw a fishing net on top of him, string him up, and lock him in the dungeon.
And back at the palace, the evening's feast/celebration continues. There's dancing, food, and drink. King Eurydice is still harping on whether the others will be joining him in battle against Thebes. He asks if he can prove that Goliath is dead. Will they be willing to join them? They're like, I guess so.
That's true. They weren't too committal. They want proof of death of Goliath before they'll commit to anything. Eurydice invites everyone to see his show of strength. Tomorrow he's going to be publicly executing Goliath's brother Ilus. So Eurydice knows that the plan to capture Ilus was a success.
And then when Goliath doesn't come to rescue his brother, it will serve as proof that Goliath is dead. And then they can take Thebes without opposition. And this is agreeable to everyone at the table.
They all agree to join Eurydice to take Thebes except Timocles. Timocles is old and needs more time to decide.
A slave girl comes up. This is Alcinous. And Eurydice describes how he had burnt down her father's city and made her his slave.
She doesn't look too happy about that.
Now Eurydice says he's going to present a gesture of friendship.
It's a giant egg. Slaves lift up the egg, and underneath that, there's a little girl who's holding a gold model of the city of Thebes, about the size of a very small dollhouse.
Eurydice says that it's a model of the city they all wish to possess, and it will serve as a reminder of their goal.
Alcinous brings it over to Eurydice, who takes it and grunts, "Here, it's for you," without looking at it, and he passes it to Timocles. Timocles finds it arousing, but finally admits that he's a no for attacking Thebes. That's Eurydice's dream, not his.
Then Tindar takes Alcinous aside and says he can take her away from all of this. But she says that she preferred to remain a slave to Eurydice. So now Timocles and Eurydice are discussing how cool it is that Eurydice has a dragon when a messenger interrupts.
The messenger has news of great import. And it's not that Goliath is dead, unfortunately. What the messenger says is that rumor has it that Goliath has succeeded in evading the dragon and seeks to gain his revenge. He goes to the temple of the god of vengeance with the blood diamond, which is the symbol of his power. So now that they're caught up on what's happening in the rest of the movie, the assembled leaders walk out en masse.
Eurydice still plans to go ahead with Ilus's execution to show that he doesn't fear Goliath. And Tindar takes him aside and recommends not executing Ilus.
Eurydice thinks that Tindar is afraid, but he's not. He's using his brain, unlike Eurydice, who is a man of fat and muscle, full of violence and brutality.
No, Tindar is devising a plan that they could use to get rid of Goliath.
To kind of draw him out.
So he goes on to say, what drives men? Ilus came here for Thea, allowing them to capture him. And Alcinous wants her freedom. So what can we do with this information?
Well, we don't know quite yet. But the next scene is Alcinous being admitted to the cell where Ilus is being held. She helps to free him. She says out of friendship for Thea. But she tells him that they mean to execute him tomorrow. She says that Eurydice has plans regarding Thea. Eurydice wants to placate Goliath to make a truce with the Thebans, but Goliath has one condition for that. He wants Thea, and Ilus explodes. Goliath and Thea, you lie. Alcinous says, why would she lie? But she tells Ilus to do nothing for now. She gives him her cloak so he can sneak out of Ocalia, and says wherever he goes, she should wait for word from her as to how to help Thea. So he prances off.
Now we're back with Goliath. He has reached the statue of the god of vengeance. He holds up the blood gem, and it flies right up and plants itself right between the statue's eyes. And then the voice from the wind goddess wings out again. Hail Goliath, you have served your gods well and completed your task.
She actually appears, we can see her now. It's sort of like the little vision of Princess Leia in the first Star Wars movie. She tells Goliath that he is free to do as he will. He is released from his tasks. And Goliath is pretty excited about this. He wants to return to his wife and family and be a man amongst men. But first he asks, what of my brother and Thea? The wind goddess says, that riddle has no answer. And then she disappears.
So Goliath heads out, where he is greeted by Antonios, and they seem to be old friends. He's come to accompany Goliath back home to Thebes.
That's his ride. At Goliath's home, his wife Deianira is getting the place ready for Goliath's return. The sheets are being perfumed, the dogs are being shooed off the furniture, hogs are being roasted, etc., etc.
Yeah, I guess hogs are Goliath's favorite.
Now in the courtyard, Ilus is doing his Morrissey impression, plucking a sad tune on his lyre. Deianira asks why the long face, because Goliath will be home soon.
He throws the instrument to the ground and says that it's true he's sad, but don't ask him to explain it. He's got to bear it by himself. And Deianira realizes that this is about Thea. She reminds him that his parents were killed by hers. And that is reason enough for Goliath to be holding a grudge against her.
But Ilus has information that Deianira doesn't. Ilus tells Deianira that he betrayed them both. Goliath wants Thea for himself. Deianira denies this. She says, you're lying to me. She doesn't believe this to be true.
So Goliath and Antonios are headed back to Thebes. They're in a little chariot being dragged by horses, and they seem to have picked up a little peasant as kind of a mascot to travel with them. At the side of the road, a man is trying to bring down a tree. He's tied a few oxen to it, but they won't budge. He sees Goliath coming down the road and flags him down. He says, I've decided to add some land to my farm, and Goliath says, that's a good idea. And then the man explains he has a problem.
Unfortunately, his oxen are lazy and they won't pull down this 20-story tree by themselves. So Goliath is going to do it. He takes the rope that's attached to the tree. The little peasant, who's a little person, goes to help, but Goliath shoos him away. And the tree comes down.
Next we see Goliath and Antonios make their triumphant return to Thebes. Deianira and the servants of the household run to greet Goliath upon his return. And all the children are especially excited to see him.
They want to hear about the dragon. But Goliath says he'll tell him tomorrow, but he gives him a sneak preview. The dragon roars like this. Rawr! Goliath wonders why Ilus didn't come to greet him, so he goes to find his brother. Ilus is still moping. He basically mopes through this entire movie. He refuses to even look at Goliath, just gives him a robotic greeting. Nice to see you.
Goliath doesn't feel this to be a very sincere greeting. But before anything can be done, Deianira interrupts and says Goliath must be famished and drags him off, leaving Antonios with a mopey Ilus.
Antonios tells Goliath, may your dreams be kind now that you sleep in your own home, and tomorrow I want to go hunting. As Ilus just stares petulantly into space. Antonio asks Ilus what the argument's about, but despite their being old friends, Ilus says nothing.
So Goliath is getting a back rub from Deianira. He says he's happy to be home, but it's not as happy as it could be. He wants to know why his brother was not happy to see him.
Deianira says that if you'll just let him marry Thea, but he's still ticked off at her dad killing his parents. Goliath says he'll kill Ilus with his own hands if Ilus goes to see Thea. Deianira, understandably, looks a little troubled by this. Now we shift back to the palace of Eurytus. Tindar is giving a vial of poison meant for Ilus to Alcinous. Only that's not the whole story. He tells Alcinous that Ilus is to give the potion to Goliath. It's not poison, it's an anti-love potion. It will make Goliath forget all about Thea. However, Alcinous is wise to his plans. She knows that Tindar is asking her to kill Goliath. She tells Eurytus that this is the same potion that Eurytus used to kill the king of Ocalia, and Eurytus slaps her face.
Alcinous goes on to say that the only way Eurytus will be accepted as the new ruler would be if he were to marry Thea, who the people see as the rightful heir to the throne. She also says that Eurydice is afraid of Goliath.
Eurydice threatens to kill Alcinous now. Alcinous doesn't care either way. She says, go ahead and do it. But that will mean that Goliath lives. Only Alcinous can give Ilus the filter, or the potion, or poison, whatever it is. Tindar says that Alcinous is right, and Alcinous confesses her real objective. She doesn't want to get released from being a slave, which is what they promised her for complying with this plan. She wants to sit on the throne, beside Eurydice, and rule.
So what's complicated here that I don't think we mentioned is that Tindar has a thing for Alcinous. So any plan that he comes up with is going to be beneficial to he and her getting together.
She doesn't want any part of that, though. That's why she just offered to be the queen of Eurydice, because she wants to have power. She doesn't really care about love. Tindar says that Thea is going to be stubborn, and unlike Alcinous, Tindar tells Eurydice that Thea is stubborn, and unlike Alcinous, Thea will never be on his side. And Eurydice angered the gods when Eurydice killed her parents, and that he should let Thea join him among the dead.
At this, Tindar sends Alcinous off on her mission to deliver that poison, and tells her that she will have an escort as far as the forest.
When Alcinous is out of earshot, though, Eurydice tells Tindar that promises were made to be broken. Tindar still wants Alcinous, and when Eurydice asks how he'll keep her from talking, Tindar says he's going to cut her tongue out. And I just want to point out right here that if you're a fan of Star Trek and you watch this movie, when you see Tindar, you'll think, oh, that's a Romulan, because that's exactly what he looks like.
He looks like a television Klingon. He's got the...
Oh, yeah, he does kind of look like either a Romulan or a Klingon.
So Alcinous has reached the edge of the forest, and she parts ways with her escorts. But the escorts hide at the edge of the forest, and the leader tells them to wait until he returns, and he goes off and follows Alcinous.
Thinking that she's alone, Alcinous rides through a field. She sees a giant bear, and it scares her. She falls off her horse and faints.
Alcinous isn't conscious from the fall, but thankfully, Goliath arrives and wrestles the bear.
And as always, Goliath makes short work of this. He goes to Alcinous and kind of demands that she thank him for what he did. They exchange names, and Goliath sees her wince at the sound of his name. He imagines that Alcinous is frightened of him, but that's not the case. She just realized that this is the man that she's supposed to kill.
Goliath says that he had been hunting the bear, and she was lucky that he came around. And this is when Antonios comes up with a few other members from their hunting party. He compliments Goliath on taking out the bear, a job well done. And as they're speaking, Alcinous steals off.
Yep, Goliath was distracted and didn't see this. Alcinous hides the vial in a dead tree trunk and runs back home. But this was observed by that guard who was following her, and the guard pulls the vial out of the tree.
So now we're back at the palace. Alcinous has returned to report on her successful mission. But before she can be praised for a job well done, Ismene comes in and says, I know you're lying.
Ismene says the guards followed Alcinous to the forest. She tells Eurydice, you'd have been better off choosing me. I offered you love, remember? Tindar accuses Ismene of lying and being jealous, but Ismene pulls out the vial. So Eurydice is convinced, and he calls the guards to have Alcinous put in the dungeon.
So back at Thebes, this evening there is a homecoming celebration for Goliath. The boar we saw being dragged through earlier is being roasted, and townsfolk are bringing gifts. Ilus is speaking with Deianira, and he says that he intends to leave. And then he does.
Goliath calls Deianira and Ilus to the table to help celebrate, but only Deianira joins him. And she immediately confesses that Ilus ran off to see Thea.
At this, Goliath jumps from the table and runs off in pursuit.
He immediately waylays Ilus, pulls him off his horse. Goliath demands that Ilus promise never to run to Thea again, and Ilus childishly says no. So Goliath ropes him to a palm tree.
Goliath tells his brother that when he changes his mind, just give him a call and he'll release him. Nearby, a woman is riding a horse, and she dismounts and hides in the bushes.
Goliath says that, I'm sorry that you forced me to do this, and when you change your mind, let me know, and he goes off to dinner.
He returns to the party and apologizes for the disturbance, and Deianira asks where Ilus is. And Goliath proudly announces he just tied Ilus to a tree. But not to worry, he'll call when he's ready and join the party.
Now that strange woman we saw earlier runs up to the bound Ilus and says, don't say anything. It's Iridae, slave to Thea. The slave girl shows Ilus his ring, and Ilus acknowledges that's his. Ilus begs Iridae to untie him. He must go to Thea. but Iridae hands him the potion. It's the same plan, but now we have a more reliable delivery system. Ilus is supposed to give that potion to Goliath, and it'll make him fall out of love with Thea. Allegedly.
Ilus asks if she's certain that this will work, and she says Thea said it was so, and that's enough for Ilus. So with the vial in hand, Ilus shouts out to his brother that he's ready to join the party, and Goliath is pleased and releases his brother.
Yep, his rope trick worked. Ilus's quick change of heart doesn't arouse any suspicion at all. In the dungeon, Alcinoe bribes the guard with a gold bracelet. After they check out the value of the merchandise, the guards let Thea in, who comes down to see Alcinoe. Alcinoe tells her the truth, that Ilus is in great danger because he was told that Goliath really wants Thea.
Thea says, I know, but it's cool because I sent a slave to give Ilus an elixir to give to Goliath that will make him forget about me. But Alcinoe tells Thea that was a trick, and the filter is actually fatal.
Yep, it's Eurydice's plan to kill Goliath.
She goes on to say that Goliath will be poisoned just as Thea's parents were, and that Thea won't marry Ilus. She'll be the bride of Eurydice. He wants to have Thea so he can become king, and she will be his queen, dilly-dilly.
Just then Eurydice comes in. He's got a phalanx of guards, and they look at the guard that took the bribe from Alcinoe, and they have him whipped, and then the other one gets whipped too. Eurydice gives the bracelet back to Alcinoe. Thea calls him a murderer, but Eurydice is unmoved. He doesn't care that Thea knows his plan. As for Alcinoe, he'd have her killed, except he promised her to Tindar.
So the cell door is locked, and everyone leaves Thea and Alcinoe in their cell. Thea starts to cry, and Alcinoe tries to comfort her, telling her that their fates are in the hands of the gods.
And she should pray. They wonder to whom, but then they hear a little gust of wind blow by, so they call out to the wind goddess to help. Goliath is the favorite of the wind goddess.
So back in Thebes, the celebration for Goliath continues. Antonios gives a toast saying that he hopes that Goliath can now receive the rest he desires. And during this toast, Ilus pours the filter into Goliath's cup.
Then the wind picks up. As Thea cries out for Ilus to hear her, the wind carries her words. She's saying that the filter was poison. It's going to kill Goliath. Don't let him drink him, etc., etc., etc. Goliath goes to drink to himself, but eventually Ilus slaps the goblet out of his hand once he's heard enough.
Goliath asks Ilus, "What is wrong with you?" And Ilus asks for forgiveness, saying he stumbled and slipped. But not to worry, more cups are brought in and the festivities can continue.
However, we see the goblet land near one of Goliath's many dogs who gets kind of ill at just being around it.
Soon it is foaming at the mouth.
Ilus drinks too and begs for forgiveness. The next day, there's a hunting trip for Goliath and Antonios, but it's interrupted by the news that, once again, Ilus has run away.
Goliath is sure that Ilus will be killed, so he and Antonios mount their horses and head to Ocalia.
And sure enough, the next time we see Ilus, he's being dragged into the cell. He breaks away when he sees Thea. They kiss for a little bit through the bars, but Ilus gets chucked into his own cell.
In the palace, King Eurydice is asking Tindar how all of his plans could have gone so wrong. They sent 2 people to give the poison to Ilus to give to Goliath, but now Ilus is in his dungeon and Goliath is still alive.
He calls Tindar a moron and says from now on he'll do the deciding. He's going to execute Ilus tomorrow. That's how he'll challenge Goliath.
And now it's execution day. Woohoo! Eurydice has gone out to witness the spectacle. He realizes Timocles hasn't arrived, but decides that he's not worth waiting for, so it's time to bring out the prisoners.
And the executioner, which is an elephant. This movie has spectacle. Now we're back with Goliath and Antonios. They waylay a couple guards and take their cloaks so they can impersonate them, I think. They leave the 2 guards tied by the side of the road. And then we see another man with his hands bound being hung upon a tree. This man complains, "I'm Timocles and they're waiting for me," but they leave him there anyway.
And back outside the palace, those in attendance for the execution are puzzled by this method of execution. They see there's an elephant here, but why?
Eurydice says, "You'll see. This is an execution and a challenge." Then we bring out a bonus prisoner. This isn't Ilus. They lay him down on the ground, and the elephant is made by his handler to stand on the prisoner's chest, crushing him. Eurydice asks Tindar if all is ready for Goliath's arrival. Tindar says the men at the gates are all prepared. Then we go down to the dungeon, where one prison guard yells down to the other one more than Goliath's brother.
We cut away to Goliath and all riding towards Ocalia, and then back outside the palace where a second prisoner is brought in. So as the second prisoner is laid down in preparation for stomping, Eurytus beckons to Tindar. Tindar says, "Good idea, that elephant. Great spectacle." And Eurytus says, "See? Tindar isn't the only one to get ideas."
And then the elephant gets to stomping, and we should mention that Ilus is out there now, and he gets to see what he's facing. Rita says, "To prove that I'm not afraid of Goliath," and then he points at Ilus, who is put under the elephant's foot. At this, Thea faints in her cell, so she may not be able to see it, but she knows what's happening.
There's an announcement made that Timocles has arrived, so Eurytus calls for the spectacle to hold up. Only it's not Timocles, it's Goliath.
Oh, surprise.
Goliath walks over to where his brother is lying on the ground and grabs the leg of the nearby elephant, and they start to wrestle.
This is actually kind of a funny scene because for once it's not a man in a suit. The elephant picks up Goliath with his trunk. Goliath gets free. They wrestle some more until the elephant sort of lays his head down on the ground.
Yeah, he doesn't hurt the elephant. He just kind of convinces it to lay down.
Eurytus calls out for the guards as Goliath frees Ilus. They have a quick hug and then everybody runs.
They run, and the townspeople, the Ocalians, they don't make it easy. They kind of ambush the soldiers themselves.
They've had enough of the rule of Eurytus, I think.
So Goliath is going to take his brother to the temple of the god of vengeance, and he calls on the wind goddess there.
Yeah, he wants to know the prophecy that she wouldn't tell him back at the beginning of the movie. The wind goddess tells Goliath that one day Ilus will rule Ocalia. But, says the goddess, it will cost Goliath the life of the woman who loves you.
Goliath and Ilus step outside. Goliath says, "The gods have spoken. Dejanira's fate is in your hands."
Ilus says that he knows, but Thea? Goliath says, "You'll forget her." Then Ilus agrees, saying, "By the only means I know." He grabs Goliath's dagger and wants to stab himself, but Goliath stops him. And the next time we see him, he's bound hand to neck on the back of a horse.
Goliath is not having a good day. So what he's done is he's wrapped chains around the pillars of his house, and he's going to pull it down. He says, "Cursed be the day that I settled here, and cursed be this land that should have brought me peace." Then he pulls down the pillars, collapsing his own house.
Yes, he's kind of a drama queen here. Dejanira tries to run to him, but Antonius tells her that it's better to let Goliath do what he wants. Like, really? He pulls down another part of the house, yelling, "Collapse like my shattered dreams." And he finishes the ruination of his own home.
So now Goliath and Dejanira are riding out, looking for a new place to settle. Goliath promises her that they'll find a place and he'll build her a new house and she'll be happy.
She asks about the prophecy and he just says, "We'll see."
So now Eurytus is going to the dungeon to give Thea and Alcinous an update for some reason. He says Goliath and Ilus have left Thebes, and now Eurytus has no reason to hold back in his plan to marry Thea and make her his queen, dilly-dilly.
Thea snipes back, "Do you think I'd marry the man who killed my father?" Which I think that's a little tad hypocritical, coming from a woman who is going to marry the son of one of her father's victims. Anyway, Eurytus motions to the guards and they grab Alcinous. Thea screams. Alcinous is dragged over to a pit on the floor. Eurytus lifts up the grates and grabs Thea so that she can watch. The pit is, it's not full of snakes, but
there's like 7 or 8 snakes down there.
It's home to a few. Thea screams and looks away. Then Alcinous is yoked up and dipped into the pit.
She's immediately brought back out, and Eurytus proposes to Thea right then and there.
She doesn't answer, so they put Alcinous back in. Tindar, by the way, is not happy about this turn of events. But Thea relents on the second dipping. She'll marry him if he gets Alcinous out of the pit.
And so Alcinous is lifted back out. So now Goliath and his troop have kind of reached a dead end. There is water that's too dangerous to pass.
It's a giant pass with no bridge. There's a waterfall on the other side.
But no worries, Goliath says he'll build a bridge out of rocks.
Out of earshot, Ilus begs Dejanira to free him so that he can kill himself and end all this.
And she says no. Instead, she'll ask the gods to kill her, and that'll just make things a lot less complicated.
Boy, somebody's got to die, though. Ilus doesn't want that, but apparently this is the prayer that the gods will answer. So Eumenide, the god that Dejanira is praying to, sends her a centaur, which immediately turns into a satyr. I think the centaur effects maybe weren't in the budget. The satyr has horns. It looks debauched and demonic. He says his name is Polymorphus, and he's here for Deianira, who faints.
As she faints, Ilus yells for Goliath. His yelling startles the horse he's sitting on, and it takes off, throwing Ilus to the ground. But he's still tied to this horse, so he's being dragged behind.
We won't see him for a while. However, the satyr picks up Deianira and starts running away with her. Goliath turns and sees this happening. He grabs a big spear, lobs it at Polymorphus. It hits him square in the back, and he yells. And then all of a sudden, the small waterfalls become big waterfalls. They just gush harder.
Polymorphus removes the spear from his back and continues into the forest with Deianira. Goliath yells out to the gods that he will get Deianira back and that he will no longer recognize them or their laws. I guess the gods aren't pleased by this because the noon sky has gone dark.
And it's dark everywhere. We're back at the palace of Eurytus, who asks Tindar to see what the heck's going on. It's dark now, and he's afraid. Tindar gloats. If his subjects could only see him now, Eurytus, afraid of the dark. Eurytus starts to choke the life out of Tindar, but he's interrupted by a guard. Not only is it dark, but there's a monster out there. Now there's a reason to be afraid.
He elaborates, saying there's a wounded centaur outside, asking for an audience with Eurytus.
So they all go outside, and there's a field where the centaur is standing.
With 4 legs.
Yeah, now he's got 4 legs again, and 2 arms. But the field is saturated with blood. The centaur says, "Goliath, your enemy, did this to me. Here is his wife, avenge me." And at that, the centaur kills over. With his dying breath, he begs Eurytus to avenge me, be strong, have no pity. And then Eurytus commands his men to take her to the dragon. So the men scoop up Deianira.
So now we see that Goliath has returned to the Temple of Vengeance. He challenges the god of vengeance as we, the audience, are treated to an upskirt shot of Goliath as he crosses over the camera.
That's really funny. He says he did their bidding, and now he wants Deianira. He yells, "Defy me, and my vengeance will be as terrible as your own." And they don't immediately answer, so Goliath says, "Then return my diamond." And he hurls a sword into the gem between the statue's eyes, and it shatters.
The statue falls as if to crush Goliath, but Goliath manages to push it back into a standing position.
It falls one more time, though, and this time he just lays it on the ground.
And the statue does seem to be flipping him off. It looks like it has a middle finger extended.
It really does. The wind goddess reappears, saying, "You have challenged us, but I am still here." She tells Goliath that Deianira is facing a horrible death underground, but the goddess will face the wrath of the gods if she tells him more. Then she says that Deianira is being sacrificed to the dragon in the caves under Ocalia, but she's forbidden to aid him. Then she says there's a secret entrance hidden at the top of a hill. But this time the gods finally get her.
Yeah, I guess she said too much because lightning bolts strike her and we never hear from the wind goddess again.
And she screams and she's gone. Goliath doesn't care, though.
So then we see that Deianira has indeed been brought down to the caves. The guards shackle her to the wall where we had seen the skeletons shackled earlier at the beginning of the film. And the dragon emerges. And Deianira screams at the sight of it.
I don't know why it's still that silly little gecko from the beginning of the movie.
Goliath hears the screams. He rushes over, taking out the 2 guards with minimum effort. Then Deianira screams to Goliath for help, and I have to wonder why she's calling her husband by his job title and not his name, which is Emilius.
No one ever calls him that. Not even his mother.
He goes to her and frees her.
Then the dragon comes closer. It changed from being a stop motion effect to a large puppet, the head of which swings into the picture with smoking nostrils. Goliath lobs a huge rock at it. Then he frees Deianira, carrying her to safety. He goes back to kill the stop-motion dragon, but then he has to fight the giant smoky puppet.
They battle. Goliath is swinging his sword. They battle some more. Goliath does manage to pluck out the dragon's eyeball. It would be really graphic if the dragon wasn't so ridiculous looking.
Some guards stroll up and see what's going on with Goliath and recapture Deianira.
Goliath finally beats the dragon without a sword, but he's kind of like wrestling it like an alligator and pulling its jaw open to the point where it breaks it, I guess, and the dragon falls dead. But by the time he gets back to where Deianira was, he finds that she is gone.
So he swears eternal vengeance on Eurytus, he will destroy him. And if we thought he was mad before, we haven't seen anything yet.
So Goliath meets up with Antonius and Ilus, who is back now, and they have a whole army with them, which is good because they have to storm the walls of Ocalia without the help or support of the gods.
Yep, even the gods are against us, says Goliath. But Goliath is willing that they will win, so they've got that on their side. Over in Ocalia, Eurytus wonders when the Thebans will attack. Tinder observes that Eurytus is afraid, and once Eurytus leaves the room, he sits on his throne, trying it out for size, I think. In Thea's room, Ismenia is claiming innocence because the love of Eurytus made her betray Thea, and I have no idea if that worked on Thea at all.
Now we see that Goliath and his group have reached the outskirts of Ocalia, and Goliath has found the secret entrance that the wind goddess had told him about. He moves a big boulder blocking the entrance, then he and Antonius go inside. They find the caves beneath the city. Goliath realizes the palace is supported by the stalagmites and stalactites, so he intends to destroy them and bring the palace toppling down. Antonius asks what about Goliath, and Goliath says, a man's got to do what a man's got to do.
And he asks Antonius to look after Ilus if Goliath should happen to not make it out of there.
So Antonius leaves, and Goliath starts swinging a stalactite at rock formations.
Now we're back in Thea's room, where Eurytus grabs Thea. He barks at her not to be afraid. He'll be gentle with his queen.
Back outside, Antonius tells the men that they must be prepared to enter as soon as there is a crack in those walls.
And Goliath successfully manages to make a whole mess of pillars come crumbling down. And up top, that makes the walls come down as well. The guards scatter. Eurytus sees this happening, and he summons the guards to come help. Soldiers inside Ocalia go to the gaps in the wall to fight, and it's time for some sword-on-shield action, where Goliath is kicking all kinds of butt.
In the chaos, Tindar goes down to the dungeon to retrieve Alcinous. But Eurytus comes in and throws a knife into Tindar's back. He falls dead.
Eurytus grabs Deianira, taunting her to call Goliath. And lo, Goliath appears.
Yeah, Goliath makes his way to the dungeon, but he's separated by a barred door.
Eurytus drags Deianira to the snake pit where she screams and then weakly murmurs, "Help me." Eurytus taunts Goliath. He wants Goliath to kneel to him and to beg him for her life.
And Goliath does this. He gets down on his knees and begs.
But Eurytus isn't satisfied. He's going to kill Deianira anyway. However, he didn't plan on Alcinous. She rushes at Eurytus, and they both tumble into the snake pit.
Goliath pulls out the barred door that was blocking him from the action. I don't know what he was waiting for. But now that it's out of his way, he jumps down into the pit and lifts Alcinous out, leaving Eurytus to wrestle a rubber snake.
This is really funny. Alcinous is dying, but she confesses that she loved Goliath ever since he rescued her from that bear. And now it's too late, but she's glad that she helped him. Then she dies.
So the house of Goliath is being rebuilt. Ilus and Thea are together. Goliath can't help with building of the house, though, because he's too busy making out with his wife.
And so it came to pass that the woman who loved Goliath died, but it wasn't Deianira, it was Alcinous, so we can have a happy ending.
And, of course, Ilus and Thea wed and became king and queen of Ocalia.
All is well in Thebes, or wherever we are. Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where this week we're talking about Goliath and the Dragon from 1960.
Goliath and the Dragon is considered a sword and sandal or peplum film. The word peplum refers to the type of short dress or toga worn by the main characters, which is a costume adventure film primarily made in Italy from 1959 to 1965. Heavily influenced by American biblical spectacles like the Ten Commandments and Samson and Delilah, the Italian films were produced with smaller budgets, but the filmmakers tried to imitate the epic quality of the U.S. films. Producer
Joseph E. Levine is credited with starting the genre as we know it now, after having big success with the Americanized version of Godzilla, the one with Raymond Burr. He turned to Italy, importing a film with the English title, The Labors of Hercules. I don't want to write down the Italian title because I knew I'd never say it right. Levine spent $120,000 to get the rights to the film, another $1 million to promote it, and then he reaped $5 million in profit, which was an amount that put Levine in the upper echelon of film producers at the time.
Levine went back to Italy for more material, and then other producers followed suit, creating a genre that thrived until 1965 when spaghetti westerns became the Italian import that took over drive-ins.
American International Pictures had announced plans to create a sequel of sorts to Goliath and the Barbarians, called Goliath and the Dragon. Sam Markoff wrote in his autobiography that they signed contracts in Italy to co-produce the new film, and Lou Russo wrote a script for them, and they flew their proposed leading lady, Deborah Paget, over to Italy. Lou Russo also flew to Rome with parts of the dragon that they would be using in the film, like a giant claw that would throttle its victims. They planned on shooting those parts later.
Just days before the production was set to begin, though, the Italian filmmakers said they needed some changes. They wanted to double the budget of the film. Arkoff held fast to his original contracts, but in his book he wrote that director Fulvio Luciano, who had worked with Arkoff and Nicholson on their initial foray into Italian cinema, had warned him that the signed contracts were considered only the first step in a negotiation. Apparently, the Italians were used to American studios with unlimited reserves of cash and hadn't counted on having to work with a penny pincher like Arkoff.
Arkoff held to his guns, though. When the negotiations deadlocked, AIP bailed on the project, much to the surprise of the Italians. After that, Arkoff went to Japan to work on Frankenstein Conquers the World. That's one of our earlier episodes. Sometime later, Arkoff received a telegram from Luciano that read, "Come to Rome. There's a partially produced picture available that could become your Goliath and the Dragon."
So Arkoff flew back to Italy to take over a Hercules movie that had run out of cash in its fourth week of production. This film was called Revenge of Hercules, and they retitled it as Goliath and the Dragon. AIP changed the hero's name from Hercules to Emilius, or Goliath, and added a Wah-Ming Chang Jim Danforth stop-motion animation sequence that gave Goliath one more monster to fight, the title one. The dragon sequence is only in the Americanized English dub print, not the original Italian version.
Arkoff also claims in his book that he convinced the movie's star, an American gymnast named Lou Degny, to adopt the more American moniker of Mark Forrest, the irony of which was not lost on Jim Nicholson, he said.
Les Baxter's new score for the movie was commissioned to create a soundtrack LP for American International Records, the recording arm of AIP.
And the English language version of the film was credited as being directed by Lee Crussell, edited by Salvatore Bilatteri and Maurizio Lucidi, with sound by Robert Sherwood. Star Broderick Crawford's voice was one of the many that were dubbed, apparently.
Goliath and the Dragon was released in Italy on August 12, 1960, where it was titled La Vendetta d'Ercole. It was released in the United States as Goliath and the Dragon beginning in November of 1960.
Our favorite magazine, Box Office, encouraged theater owners to address the spectacle and the new Steve Reeves-type hero by using stills and blow-ups of Mark Forrest destroying the three-headed dragon. That's what they said. It was really a dog. They also recommended that they promote Broderick Crawford's CV because he won an Academy Award in 1949 for All the King's Men.
Taglines for Goliath and the Dragon include, "The mightiest adventure of them all, see Goliath's battle with a three-headed dog, a giant flying bat, and a vicious centaur.
1001 all new thrills.
Amazing, fantastic, overwhelming.
Goliath is back in his newest and mightiest adventure."
As far as reviews go for Goliath and the Dragon, the New York Times review was not very favorable and took a shot at Mark Forrest, who, to the reviewer, Howard Thompson, was no Steve Reeves by a long shot. Almost lopsided with biceps, Mr. Forrest substitutes grinning and grimacing for Reeves' noble profile.
Sounds like he's jealous.
It then laid into the plot, the acting, and the animals, calling them more cardboard than any of Mr. Reeves' set-em-up exercises. The dragon is an inflated fugitive from Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
That was a kid's puppet show at the time. Box Office Magazine reviewed the film, saying that Mark Forrest is a handsome muscle man who is almost a carbon copy of Steve Reeves and delivers just as little dialogue as that athletic wonder. I guess everyone was really into Steve Reeves. The sole marquee name is Broderick Crawford, who stalks through the picture as a scowling Scarface ruler. Eleanor Ruffo and the other players are Italian and sufficient unto their roles. With its title and fantastic theme, this is made to order for the youngsters and the action enthusiasts. The visual is always uppermost and even includes a sexy slave dance, as well as a terrific battle between the hordes of troops. The color scope photography adds to the realism, and Les Baxter's musical score is appropriately thunderous. Forrest and Crawford apparently speak English, while the Italian dubbing is excellent.
The film is listed in Golden Raspberry Award founder John Wilson's book, The Official Razzie Movie Guide, as one of the 100 most enjoyably bad movies ever made.
Surprisingly, many of the actors in this movie appeared in other AIP movies or were released to television through AITV. Mark Forrest, our Goliath, appeared in Goliath and the Sins of Babylon in 1963, Colossus of the Arena in 1962, Hercules against the Mongols 1963, and Hercules against the Barbarians in 1964, which was a AITV project.
Broderick Crawford, who played King Eurytus, would appear as the lead in The Private Files of J. Edgar Hoover in 1977.
Now here's where we admit we weren't exactly sure which actors went with which characters. IMDb lists Renato Tero Caizzi as Antonios, but in all the photos, it's Philippe Hercent. So we're just going to say that Renato Tero Caizzi was in Goliath and the Barbarians, 1961, Black Sunday, 1960, and Goliath and the Vampires, again in 1961.
Yeah, the reason these dates are out of order is because they might have been produced in Italy in that year, but released domestically a year or two later, the years that were given. So the original release dates in Italy. Ugo Sasso, who played Timocles, had appeared in Goliath and the Barbarians in 1959 and would appear in the AITV distributed product Dracot the Avenger in 1961, Zorro in the Court of Spain in 1962, and The 10 Gladiators in 1963. Revenge of the Musketeers, also in 1963, theatrically in Goliath and the Sins of Babylon in 1963, and back to television for Zorro and the Three Musketeers in 1964. Again theatrically, Hercules against the Barbarians in 1964, and the final two product distributed by AITV, Slave Queen of Babylon in 1964, and Hercules and the Masked Rider, also in 1964.
Salvatore Ferrari, the little peasant, appeared in The Seven Dwarfs to the Rescue, which came out in 1951 and was distributed by AITV. Giancarlo Sabraggia, Tindar, appeared in Messalina, also 1951, which came out via AITV in 1964.
Wandisa Guida, who played Alcinoi, would go on to appear in The Prisoner of the Iron Mask in 1961, and the AITV distributed Dracot the Avenger in 1961 and Hercules against Rome in 1964, theatrically released Secret Agent Fireball in 1965, and in 1966, Killers Are Challenged for AITV.
Eleonora Ruffo, who was Dejanira, appeared in Goliath and the Vampires, 1961. Spartaco Nali, who had no character name, was in Messalina, 1951, an AITV release of 1964, and Marco Polo, a theatrical release from 1962.
Carlo Callo had appeared in Goliath and the Barbarians in 1959, and in films distributed by American International Television, Dracot the Avenger, 1961, Brennus, Enemy of Rome, 1963, Revenge of the Musketeers, 1963, Ali Baba and the Seven Saracens, 1964, and the theatrically released Secret Agent Fireball, 1965.
Piero Pastore, a prison guard, appeared in The Prisoner of the Iron Mask, theatrical 1961, Slave Queen of Babylon, a AITV release of 1964, and Goliath and the Sins of Babylon, a theatrical release from 1963.
And Fedele Gentile, a peasant, would appear in Hercules against the Mongols in 1963, and then Brennus, the Enemy of Rome, Revenge of the Musketeers, and Sword of the Empire, all distributed by American International Television in 1964, and Goliath at the Conquest of Damascus, distributed by AITV in 1965.
And our last actor is Philippe Hercent, who may have been Antonios, or he may have been another character called Androclo. We're really not sure. He was in Guns of the Black Witch in 1961, Attack of the Normans in 1962, 79 AD, that same year, 62, War of the Zombies in 1964, and he was in A Matter of Time in 1976, which is another one of our earlier episodes. Now, Jeff, it's the time of the podcast where we explain how we felt about the movie, and we rate it using our AIP system, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic. How do you rate Goliath and the Dragon?
One thing that these movies are known for, whether it's deserved or not, is bad dubbing. But I didn't think the dubbing in Goliath and the Dragon seemed that bad. The characters appeared to be mumbling much of the time, so it didn't seem that there were a lot of intricate lip movements that they needed to try to match up. But what I did notice was that at times the characters seemed to ramble on as the English version struggled to keep up with the Italian dialogue. There's an early sequence where King Eurytus' palace where he speaks of leaving the dragon in the caves, and I think this is a good reflection of this, where they just go on and on about this dragon, and I understand they wanted to put the dragon into the plot, but it also seems like they're just trying to put words in these people's mouths because the Italian keeps going on. And I didn't find this to be detrimental at all, but rather I found it kind of amusing and endearing. But the biggest problem I have with Goliath and the Dragon is that the character isn't Hercules. I mean, he so obviously is, and he is in the Italian version, but he's not referred to that name in the English dub. So while I was taking notes for this podcast, I had to make a conscious effort not to write down Hercules. Every time I'd be thinking Hercules and have to think, no, write Goliath when referring to the main character. But that's a personal issue and not a problem with the film itself. And we've stated before that most of the films that we're covering on American International Podcast are chosen randomly, and that's true. But we do allow ourselves a personal pick once in a while, and we do this so that we don't end up with too many dogs in a row. We don't want to find ourselves doing all the beach pictures all at once, and likewise, we don't want to do all the peplum sword and sandal pictures in a group. And I don't think this has ever been publicly stated, but you and I have said in private that the sword and sandal genre is neither of our favorites. But I did pick this one because A, I thought the backstory was interesting, and B, we're nearly a full year into this podcast, and our randomizer has yet to pick any of these sword and sandal films, and I wanted to avoid a situation where we find ourselves having to watch them all over the course of a few weeks. And I'm glad I chose this one because it turned out to be a lot of fun. The pacing is very, very quick. Goliath battles a 3-headed dog, a giant bat, topples a tree, fights a bear, battles an elephant, pulls down his house, wrestles with a giant statue, spears a centaur, and finally battles a dragon, which he ends up slaying with his bare hands after severely wounding it with his sword. And as a bonus, we get to see Eurytus wrestle a rubber snake. And this all happens over the course of 90 minutes. And there's a fairly intricate political assassination plot going on. I didn't realize it upon my first viewing just how complicated it actually was. I was just along for the ride, and it wasn't until my second viewing, when I was taking notes, that I became aware of how detailed these plans and the counterplans were. And amazingly, I think everything checks out. There aren't really any loose threads or wild assumptions made just to move the plot along. The whole thing may have an air of ridiculousness, but it seems to be logically sound. And that's just incredible when you consider that AIP created Goliath and the Dragon the way they did. They took a half-completed film, added dialogue during the dubbing process to reference a dragon, since they'd already created a poster featuring a dragon, and funded the extra footage to include said dragon, and somehow it all managed to come together in this wacky, fun movie. So I'm going to give this one an inexplicable A. This movie is awesome. I never would have guessed that I'd end up enjoying this one as much as I did. And now I'm not filled with complete dread with the thought of looking at another one of these types of pictures. So I say Goliath and the Dragon is an A picture. What do you think, Cheryl?
You stole my word, endearing. There is a certain endearing quality about these sword and sandal epics, with their imperfect dubbing, their silly monsters, their hot and bothered young lovers and oiled up strongmen that I enjoy. And this epic tale of Goliath versus a dragon is better than most of them. I think the writing and the dubbing both go a long way to making it a really watchable movie. The writing is pretty clever at times. I laughed out loud when Goliath, the needlessly dramatic, said, "Collapse like my shattered dreams," when he was knocking down his own home. Or when Tinder called Eurytus a mass of fat and muscle, full of violence and brutality. He was right. That's Eurytus to a T. Or when Goliath goes back to his party, just nonchalantly saying that he tied Ilus to a tree, kind of chuckling. I laughed too. It's just so ridiculous. And as for Ilus, I think he might be my favorite character in the whole movie. He's always sulking and moping, making faces and whining about not getting his way, not getting to be with Thea. I don't buy him as the future king of Ocalia, but he's a fantastic contrast to Goliath, both physically and emotionally. Ilus is slender and weedy, and he spends his time pouting and playing sad music. I mean, he's basically me as a teenager. Of course, the monsters, including the title dragon, are very poorly done. But again, that's the fun of the movie. You just have to try not to laugh when the man-bat attacks Goliath in his mangy fur costume, or when the smoking dragon head tries to headbutt Goliath, who kills it by prying its jaws apart or whatever. And the bear, just obviously a dude in a bear suit. It's so funny. The story is nonsensical, of course, with a mixture of Greek myth and then this modern storytelling that was added in later. So whoever dubbed the film was able to cobble together a story that went with the visuals, and it didn't lose the plot's forward motion. So I think the writers of the American dialogue did a great job of making it work. And yeah, there's some odd turns in the plot, but I think they really held it together. I have to admit that watching the film for the podcast made it a little less fun. It does start to seem overlong after a while, and there's some repetitive sequences they probably could have edited out. And the court intrigue started to bore me in some places because in taking notes, we had to go back over it again and again to make sure that we got the story correct. So after a while, the plots against Goliath, against Ilus, against whoever got a little on the boring side. It looked like Broderick Crawford didn't want to be here, and I don't really blame him. But all in all, I think this film was an enjoyable diversion, and I'm glad I don't have to watch it again if I don't want to. But still, I'm going to give it an A, maybe a qualified A. It's not perfect, but I enjoyed it. Well, Jeff, I think we've slayed this episode of the American International Podcast, so it's time to say goodbye. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.